Hi guys, it's Annie with Manor Farms Homestead. Today we're going to be doing a soap making video, and I'm going to be very basic in this video just to show you how to make soap for the first time. But you can get really creative as you move forward with soap making. I do all cold processed soaps, so you can make some really beautiful designs, bright colors. I want to show you some of the soaps that I've done over the last few years. This is a honey soap, and as you can see, it's made to look like it has a honeycomb pattern. We do that with bubble wrap. And then this is just a drop swirl design in here. This is a olive exfoliating bar. I actually put egg in this as part of my liquid ingredients. It's got poppy seeds in it for natural exfoliation. Really nice soap there. This is one of my favorites. It is a natural exfoliating bar as well. It's a oatmeal and buttermilk bar. So you can use a lot of different liquids like milk, aloe vera, water, things like that in your soap. This is just a milk soap, just a plain basic bar, kind of like what we're gonna do today. Again, some more drop swirl designs. This is a lavender bar. We've got a honeysuckle bar here. And this is just a plain pure coconut bar. So you can be really simple with something like this or do some interesting swirls. This is a rose bar. We've got a coffee bar, white rose. This is a eucalyptus bar. This particular pattern is what they call a drop swirl. And it's just a lot of different techniques that you can use with your soaps. Some glitter, biodegradable glitter on top of this bar. So you can get super creative. Again, today we're just gonna do a basic bar and show you how to get started with soap making. All right, first up with your soap making, you're gonna need some basic equipment. You're gonna need several heat-proof containers that you can use for mixing. You do need a kitchen scale that's accurate that you can use for weighing ingredients. That's important with soap making, to measure based on weight as opposed to volume. You're gonna need lye, and you're gonna need soap molds. Now there are a variety of different types of soap molds that you can use. I like the loaf molds the best because you get the best product out of that. You do ultimately have to slice these into bars as opposed to using something like this with pre-molded bars. The reason I like the loaf molds better, and the reason you get a better soap with these, is because it's a larger volume that heats up. And that heating up process, once you add the lye and the fat, is what causes the soap to mature and to turn into soap as opposed to staying separate ingredients. With this, the heat is not going to be as great, and your soap is going to be more brittle. It's also going to melt faster. So this seems like an easy way to get started with soap. They're also harder to deal with. So a lot of people will start with these but move on. So when you're trying to pour it into these and get all the air bubbles out, this just produces a lower quality soap. So you can get different types of loaf molds, different shapes. I have some that are really long and a little bit wider. These are readily available on Amazon and work just fine. Now for slicing these, you're going to want to get some type of soap slicer, but we'll get to that later in the video. What I have here is the mixture of different types of fats that I'm going to use in my soap. It's a combination of lard, shea butter, coconut oil, olive oil, sweet almond oil, and castor oil. Castor oil is a key ingredient in any soap you make at home. Castor oil gives you more lather and foaming effect of your soap. So All of the recipes that I've written for soap that I've made over the last 5 years include at least 1 to 2 ounces of castor oil in them. You don't want to put a large amount of castor oil or your soap will get soft, but about 1 to 2 ounces in a 64-ounce recipe is perfect for adding additional lather to your soap. I go with a 64-ounce recipe, which works well with 2 of these loaf molds. And when I say 64 ounces, I'm talking about the fat content of my soap. Each type of fat that you use in your recipe has a different saponification value. That is the amount of lye that it takes to completely turn 100% of that fat into soap. So you really have to either have a recipe that's already got that calculated or use a lye calculator, which is how I've created all of my recipes. I put in different ratios of different fats and plugged it into a lye calculator, and it gave me the calculation of how much lye to put into that particular recipe. I will post the recipe for this particular soap in the description so that you have that, but you can make up any particular recipe you'd like just by using a lye calculator. Now, there is a variation of how much liquid you can put in your soap, because you do have the fat content, and then your lye has to be mixed with some sort of liquid. You can use water, you can use milk, you can use aloe vera. I use egg in some of my soap. So you're gonna have a certain volume of liquid that's mixed with your lye. Now, if you're using something like egg, that's a different ball game. I mix that into my fat, but we're not gonna go into that today. So typically for my recipes, which include 64 ounces of oil, my range of liquid that I add with my lye is going to be somewhere between 15 and 25 ounces of liquid. I tend to shoot for about 18 ounces of liquid unless it's a recipe that I need it to be thinner so I can get some better drop swirls, things like that. But 18 ounces is a pretty good spot for me to be at with my liquid ingredients. If you go over the 25 ounces, or if even you get up to the top limit of the amount of fluid in your soap, you're gonna have more issues with soda ash. And that also is a whole nother topic of soap making that we're not gonna get into today. So 18 ounces tends to work well. I don't get a lot of soda ash. I still have enough fluidity of my soap that I can get it into the molds typically before it starts setting up really hard. It just works well. Now, one of the other factors in making soap is the type of fragrance oil or essential oil that you're using to scent your soap. Some fragrance oils cause the soap almost to what they call seize, where it sets up almost immediately once it comes in contact with that fragrance oil. If that's the case with a particular fragrance oil, maybe you don't want to deal with that fragrance oil again. But all of your fragrance oils are going to cause your soap to start setting up a little bit faster than if you just use an unscented recipe. Today we are actually using a fragrance oil that you can't see anymore. It was a Sleepy Time fragrance oil. It's kind of a vanilla, lavender, chamomile kind of scent to it. Now, because it has the vanilla scent, any of your fragrance oils that have that is typically going to turn your soap brown. Not immediately, but the following day, once it's set up in the molds, it's not going to be the same color it was when you put it in there, and that has to do with the fragrance oil. So if that is not a desired effect in your soap, make sure you're checking the vanilla content on your fragrance oil so that you know what you're dealing with, and or play around with it and see what works for your soap, what doesn't. If you're using a lot of different colors, you can use mica powders, but if you have a fragrance oil that turns your soap brown, your mica colors are not going to show up because it's just going to turn brown. So keep that in mind when working with soap. Today, we're just doing a basic soap. I know this particular fragrance oil will turn my soap brown, so I'm not using any colors. This is just going to be a scented brown milk soap, kind of like one of the ones I showed you at the beginning of this video. With this particular recipe, this has lard, coconut oil, shea butter. olive oil, sweet almond oil, and castor oil. So the lard, the shea butter, and the coconut oil have to be in the melted form. At room temperature, they're solid. So this has been heated slightly in the microwave, and we've let it come back down to about 120 degrees. You do not want to soak with your oil being really hot. That is also going to cause your soap to set up really fast the hotter it is. So your goal is about 120 degrees or a little bit less on your oils. The same is going to be true for your lye and liquid mixture. We're going to go ahead and get our lye mixture together. We're going to measure out our lye. And with our recipe, we are going to be using 9.17 ounces of lye. Now, the amount of lye that is calculated for this recipe includes what is called a super fat. And that is the amount of fat over the 100% saponification value. So we're going to have additional fat that this lye is not going to react with. And that's just to ensure that we don't have any lye that is unreacted that could irritate the skin or cause any types of burns. Make sure you use gloves and ideally eye protection when you're dealing with lye. And you're going to slowly add your lye to your liquid. You can add it fairly quickly if you're doing this with water, but you do need to have ventilation if you're doing this with water because it does create some steam and fumes. It does not do that as much with frozen liquid like this milk, but you definitely want to add it slowly to your milk so you don't scorch your milk. And be very gentle with stirring it so that you don't knock it out of the container. The lye causes a reaction with the liquid in this. It heats up and your ice cubes or milk cubes will start melting. This will turn our milk kind of a yellow color with the reaction. And if you add your lye too quickly, it will scorch and give it almost a burnt color. So you do want to go slowly with this. Lye is very alkaline, and that's how it can burn you. The antidote to lye is vinegar because it is a strong acid which counteracts and neutralizes the alkaline in your lye. So anytime you're making soap, it's not a bad idea to have a little cup of vinegar available to you just in case you were to get some on your skin and need to neutralize that. You can see on here how the lye sticks to the container. Lye very quickly absorbs moisture out of the air. So just be very careful with dealing with your containers. Don't touch them without gloves on. All right, we've got all of our lye into our milk solution. We're just gonna stir this till the last of it dissolves and our ice cubes melt. The nice thing about using ice cubes and frozen milk is that your lye is basically at the temperature that you want it to be when you're done combining this, as opposed to if you use just regular water and it heats up really hot, then you have to wait for it to cool down. When you use ice, you're closer to your target temperature and or at your target temperature. When I use just regular water and lye, I often will add just a pinch of real silk fibers, and they'll dissolve in that hot liquid, and that gives your soap a really nice silky, no pun intended, silky feel on your skin when you use it. With milk soap, you can't do that. This is not hot enough to dissolve silk fibers right now. Okay, we've got everything melted. We're just going to set this aside while we get everything in place to go ahead and mix our soap and get it into the mold. One of the other important tools you'll need with soap making is an emulsion blender. You really can't make soap without that, so you do need that. All right, we're going to go ahead and get this lye mixture added to our fat. There was quite a bit of fat actually already in this milk. We used our Jersey milk, our raw Jersey milk, to make this soap, and it had quite a bit of fat in it. So that is yet another type of fat that your lye will interact with. I'm gonna go ahead and get this blended. And just pulse your emulsion blender initially. You don't want to slosh this out on you because it's raw soap batter. If you were going to add color to this, now would be the time to mix your soap batter into different little containers that you could put your color in. We're not doing any color on this. Like I said before, it's going to turn brown with our fragrance oil. So we have our fragrance oil here. I'm using 3 ounces of our fragrance oil. Somewhere between 2 and 4 ounces is about where you want to be with most fragrance oils for a 64-ounce fat soap recipe. Once you add this, your soap's going to start setting up quickly, so do have your molds prepared and ready to go. Just like that. This is why you have gloves on. It's easy to slash it. And you can see that batter thickens up really quickly. All right. Pop this off. Get it cleaned off. Another important thing to have ready to go is something that you can plop stuff with raw batter on, like that. I'm gonna just clean up this little bit that I sloshed on myself. And we're gonna get this into molds. This soap, as you can see, is setting up pretty quickly. It's getting thick. If you want to be able to do a lot of swirls, you need a thinner batter. And this particular soap has quite a bit of hard fats in it. So the coconut oil, the shea butter, the lard, all of those set up a lot quicker than things like olive oil or sweet almond oil. So you have less time to work with your soap. For this particular soap, since we knew we were not adding any kind of color or designs, it was all right to have all of those hard fats. But again, if you want a swirl soap, you have to have a different recipe. For my milk soap, I typically just do a one color soap. So you need to slam these down in the molds to get all of the air bubbles out. This is where eye protection is important. Again, do as I say, not as I do. And you do want to slam those pretty good so that you get all of the little air bubbles out, because the air bubbles make your soap look terrible when you slice it. You want it to look nice and solid. Then you do want to have something to make a design on the top so that it looks pretty. I like the spoon swirl. So now my girls wanted me to decorate this since I wasn't using any pretty fancy colors, so we're going to put some biodegradable glitter on the top. And that's as fancy as our design is going to get on this particular soap. Last but not least, whenever you're doing your soap, you do want to spray the top of it with alcohol. This is isopropyl alcohol, 91%. 91% works better than 70%. And this forms a little barrier on the top of your soap, and you'll get less soda ash. Like I had said before about soda ash, the more liquid you use, the higher amount of soda ash on the top. That's just kind of a white coating that can form between the water and the lye. It's just unattractive. There are different ways to deal with it, but we'll get into that in another video. So for now, what we're going to do, these boxes do insulate this. I like to keep them together. You are going to want to cover this soap to hold in as much heat as possible. So I usually use a towel or rag or something and just put that over the top. We're going to add another layer of towel to this as well. So one more layer over this, and that helps to hold in the heat around this soap. So we're using cold process method, but this soap is still going to heat up and get really hot to create that chemical reaction that turns the fat in the lye into soap. So you do want to keep it warm and insulate it. So this is going to sit like this for about 24 hours before we slice it. And we'll be back after that to show you how that process goes. All right, our soap's been sitting up for about 18 hours at this point. I typically let it sit for about 18 to 24 hours. I'm not actually going to be here at the 24-hour mark this afternoon because I'll be at work. So I'm going to go ahead and get this sliced before I head out. If you let your soap sit too long, it sometimes can get super hard and it's difficult to slice. Occasionally you have a softer soap that does need to sit a little bit longer than the 24-hour mark. As long as it's no longer warm, you're typically good to go ahead and slice it again, unless you're dealing with a really soft soap that you did a lot of swirl designs and it just needs longer to sit. As you can see, this did turn brown. It was that nice beige color yesterday, and today we've got a dark brown soap. And there's a little defect here in this loaf, and that's just where we didn't smack it down hard enough to get all of the air bubbles out. Some of these areas are still a little light color. That will continue to darken as it sits. A lot of times when you slice it, the inside of the soap will still be a light color, but as it's exposed to air, it will continue to darken. So this is just a soap slicer that's set up with a guitar string on here, a metal guitar string that cuts the soap. I have my bars set to 1 inch, and there's a little piece over here that you can adjust and make your bar width different sizes depending on what you want. And as you can see, still a real light color inside. Now that that's exposed to air, it will continue to set up and not continue to set up, but continue to darken and become this kind of coffee color that you see on the outside. I usually just take my fingers and wipe any little bit of soap residue off of the string each time I cut. I also go around the edges and just kind of smooth that off with my fingers, because this is still slightly soft, and you can do that at this point. You can also take a vegetable peeler and bevel off these edges just to make it look prettier if you like. And this one little defect on the end is now on our end slice, so that's not really a full bar of soap. I use a lot of those. We're going to continue slicing this next loaf. These molds are silicone, so they're very flexible, which is really good and allowing you to get your soap out of the mold. Just kind of pull it to the side on all 4 corners. And then I usually bend it over on itself to get it out. All right, we've got all of these bars of soap sliced up, and we're gonna go ahead and separate these other trays of soap that I made yesterday. So we talked a little bit about these particular trays that make individual bars of soap. So I'm gonna show you how those did. This was another batch that I didn't show in the video. But as you can see, they're more difficult to get all of the little imperfections and air bubbles out of. Slamming these trays down is a much lighter weight than what you get on the larger trays, so you can have more defects in this particular soap. This we used a different fragrance oil, so as you can see, it is turning it somewhat brown, but it's not super dark like our other soap. But most of the trays have a nice design, so you can make pretty little bars like that. They're just not quite as solid and hard as the ones in the loaf trays. Now these are slightly different. They also make individual bars, but they do have to be slice. And this works a little bit better than those trays, but again, I go back to the loaf trays seem to produce the best bar of soap. But you can get some cute molds out of these, some cute little patterns on your molds. This one says milk, which is what we made, milk soap. So that's how those turn out. Now, these, like I said, do have to be sliced. And you can use something like this, but this is not quite wide enough. So I'm actually going to use a knife because this has got a wide spot at the end that I don't want to mash my soap with. So I'm just going to take this knife and cut our bars as evenly as I possibly can. Bar. Again, the bottom side of these is not as smooth. You can trim this to make it perfect if you want. This soap is just for us. It's not for sale. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but that's how you operate with these little trays. That's it on slicing up our soap. We'll leave this all to sit out here for and air dry a little bit for about 24 hours. After that, these will go to my drying racks and actually cure for about 6 weeks before we use them. So with a cold process soap, your lye is going to continue to interact with your fat for that amount of time. If you use hot process, you can go ahead and use your soap immediately. But with this, it does have to cure because this is still a soft soap. It's going to harden up and fully come together over the next 6 weeks. All right, so I'm just going to give you the final update on this soap. Since we cut it, the colors have continued to change a little bit. Like I said, as it's exposed to air, the lighter color brown in this soap is going to turn darker brown. So these are really super pretty soaps. It's like a mahogany brown. And this will continue to deepen and darken more like the edges here with a little bit of glitter on top. I really wish we had taken some of the pink soap that we used for our first batch. You can see that. We did not put scented oil into that. And I think that would have looked lovely swirled into this mahogany bar with some rose colored pink kind of swirled throughout it. So that gives me an idea in the future of something that I might use. So the little soaps that we did in the milk molds almost have a marbled kind of appearance, or almost a burnt kind of looking appearance, where they have the darker patches and the lighter patches. And again, we did not put any fragrance oil in our pink soap that we mixed with this, so it stayed pink. This, I believe, is my favorite one of these. Every bar is just individually unique with different patterns. It almost has like a stained look. It's really pretty. So that's it for this soap making adventure. We made our lovely mahogany brown Sleepy Time soap with some glitter. And then we made another batch of milk soap that was scented with a buttercream scent. So cute little bars. We're gonna let these sit for about 6 weeks just to cure. Keep them in a cool, dry place. A lot of times a cardboard box in a closet is a good spot for them to just sit undisturbed and cure. And we'll bring you back when we do some more soap making. This kind of piqued my interest back up in it. I haven't made any soap in quite a while, just due to being busy with everything else around the farm. So I love making soap. This has got me excited to do some more soap. So hopefully in the near future, I'll be doing some videos with some cool swirl designs. We'll do some hanger dip designs and just get into some of the more technical and creative ways that you can make your soap look pretty.